So the bike that I'm riding today is a it's a 2002 Suzuki DR 400S that I've had since 2006. This is the third dual sport bike I've had that's been my primary rider or whatever, the bike that I ride primarily. Prior to this, I had a 1994 Suzuki DR 350 SE that I bought new one weekend before Memorial Day weekend in 1994, and then I racked up that bike to about 16,000 miles and then sold it and bought a very gently used 1997 DR 350 SE that was on consignment at a little motorcycle shop not too far from me. And the only reason I bought the 97 is the 1994, it started to act up and lose power a little bit, and I think a lot of that was my stupidity or lack of knowledge on proper air filtration systems to use. So I just got sucked into the whole K&N reusable air filter thing, which is what I had used on several of my vehicles. Well, a K&N filter is the absolute worst filter to use on a bike that is ridden off-road, because go to a store, take an air filter out of the box, a K&N, hold it up to the light, an automotive filter, and look through it. You can see the lights through the filter. I ended up using that same stupid K&N air filter in the 1997, and it was getting to the point where it was losing power as well. So why is it losing power? It was sucking dust, wearing out the valves and the piston rings, likely. I honestly can't remember when I bought the second DR 350. I'll put a note on the screen once I am editing this video and look at my notes. A few years after that, like say 2004, 2005, I met some more people and started doing a little bit more riding. And well, a friend of a friend, he got two coworkers into riding, and they both bought Suzuki DR 350 or DRZ 400s. 2005, I was camped over here with Jeff. He was the guy with the DR 350, and then one of his co-workers with the DRZ. The three of us were camped over here, and we took a ride up Lake Wenatchee, way up into the hills, whatnot. And then on our way back, once we got back on the paved road, we all stopped, and I think Jeff's friend said, his name was Shell, he said, hey, let's swap bikes. So I did, or maybe I asked, I don't remember. I got on the DRZ, and I couldn't believe how much more ergonomically friendly it was compared to the DR 350. A DR 350, the foot peg to seat distance was less than on a DRZ 400. So my knees were a little bit more bent. So on the DRZ, I felt more upright. I didn't feel as cramped. So later that year, or no, that was towards the end of 2005. So early 2006, I decided it was time to buy a new bike. So at the time, there was a big internet discussion group. This was long before Facebook and the popularity of internet forums and whatnot. There was you could check out these discussion groups one of two ways. You could do it via email, or you could go onto the website. And it was all discussion groups hosted through yahoo.com. So they were called Yahoo groups. And it was kind of, I guess, the equivalent of what you would say is a Facebook discussion group nowadays. But you could either go to the website and do it, or you could tell the group to email you the message anytime somebody posted a message to it. So in that group, somebody posted that they had a DRZ 400 for sale. It was a 2002. It had 895 miles, or maybe 875 miles on it. 4 years old, but the guy had hardly ridden it. And it was yellow, and I didn't want a yellow DRZ. I wanted a blue one. But I decided to buy it. And then a month later, I did a 4x4 swap meet. And lo and behold, somebody had a complete set of blue DRZ plastics for sale at a 4x4 swap meet. So I bought those and switched the bike over to blue. And sold most of the yellow plastic eventually. So by the time I bought that DRZ, I had already had a pretty good idea of how I wanted to have a bike set up. I wheeled the bike into my living room, or actually technically it was the dining room. I threw out a big chunk of cardboard on the floor, wheeled the bike in there, and commenced to doing all my upgrades and switching the plastic and everything. Got rid of the hideous rear fender and taillight unit. So a month or two later, I had the bike all put together, and I'll throw some images up on the screen here that show what it looked like before and after I did all the upgrades. And here it is 18 years later, and I still am riding the same motorcycle. I have had 2 other motorcycles in conjunction with owning the DRZ. Actually, I've had 4. I had a KTM, a 2012 KTM 500 EXCF, or maybe it was an EXC. I don't remember if KTM had the F designation after the EXC back then or not, but it was the dual sport version. It was fuel injected. I believe that was the first year the fuel injected on the dual sport bike. I actually rode it a lot that year after my DRZ developed a cam chain issue. So the DRZ was out of commission for about a month or so, while lo and behold, it was actually Don Weeks that did all the repairs to it. And then I moved to Spokane from Western Washington in early 2013, and I had financed that KTM, so I was making payments on it. And I wasn't riding that much anymore because I moved away from all my riding buddies. So in early or late 2013, I decided to sell the KTM. It was a lot of fun to ride, but it vibrated a lot. I had done a few things to try to reduce the vibration through the handlebars, but it never was suitable to me. It still vibrated a lot, and at the time I was having issues with my hand, especially my right hand, what I thought was carpal tunnel. So the vibration amplified the issues of that hand after like a couple of hours of riding. So those two things kind of convinced me to sell the bike, primarily because I wasn't riding it a whole lot, and I couldn't justify keeping a piece of motorized equipment around that I wasn't using and I was making payments on it. And then I also had a KLR 650 that I bought in 2012 as a 2007 model. So during that short time frame that I had those two bikes, the DRZ was still my primary bike to ride. Although in 2012 I did ride the KTM a lot since the DRZ was out of commission. I had the KLR up through early 2020, I think. So the next one that I bought is a 2019 KTM 450 EXCF 6 days. So in 2019, the only way to get the 450 in a dual sport was to buy the 6 days version. And how I got sucked into that idea was, it was sort of twofold. A friend of mine in 2018 bought the Husky version of that KTM. So it's a FE 450. And then what also spurred me into buying it was the local KTM dealer in Spokane. It was a small independent shop or dealership, very small business. The gentleman that owned it retired, didn't want to continue the business. He was basically done. And then he wanted to pass it on or sell it to his son, but his son wasn't really into motorsport. So they basically shut down the business, and another local dealer, motorcycle dealer, power sports dealer, which I had done some business with buying some Polaris rigs, they took on the KTM franchise or dealership or whatever you'll call it. So I still have that bike. I've had it 5 years now, almost 5 years. I've hardly ridden it much. It's only got maybe 16 to 1700 miles on it. I did ride it quite a bit early this year. I took it on a trip down to Death Valley with Andy, and we did 8 or 9 days worth of riding. So another bike that I had during the time that I've owned this DRZ, that was very short-lived also. It's a Yamaha Tenere 700. Bought that with the intention of doing this kind of riding with it, and riding, like, say, the Washington Backcountry Discovery Route and the Idaho Backcountry Discovery Route, or Idaho BDR, Washington BDR. Bought that in early 2022. Got it outfitted, put all kinds of stuff on it to get it set up the way I wanted it. Rode it around home a bunch to get my break-in miles on it. Took it on a short trip from Spokane down to Avery, Idaho, and then went up the old railroad grade. Actually, this was a road that paralleled the old railroad grade out of Avery towards Moon Pass or Wallace. So that was actually the extent of the dirt riding I did on it, maybe 10 or 11 miles. Then, lo and behold, I broke my wrist early 2023. And that has kind of given me a little bit different perspective on the type of riding that I want to do moving forward. So I sold the bike. The other thing too is I had bought a new Polaris Ranger last summer. Should have done some math on what kind of financing costs would be. I knew what the interest rate was, but I really should have done some better math and realized how much interest I would be paying out on the loan for that Ranger. So after I made a couple payments and then started looking at the banking information, I realized, holy crap, better than 1/3 of the payment is going towards interest. That's absolutely insane. And I realized, holy cow, this is stupid. So that's another thing that made me decide to sell the Tenere. So I took the money I made selling that and paid off the stinking loan on the Ranger. I used the Ranger around home a lot, so a Ranger was a much more important tool to have around than a motorcycle that would only get ridden a couple of times a year. When you have multiple bikes, you kind of end up having one as the primary bike and the two others sit there. And that's the case with the KTM and the T7. I'm keeping the KTM because it is a phenomenal motorcycle on trails. Doing single track stuff that I still like to do. Plus, that bike was so much more enjoyable to ride down in Death Valley than my DRZ would have been. There's a lot of rocky stuff, sandy washes to go through and whatnot. And the DRZ is a big fat pig. The DRZ is awesome on Forest Service roads. And I like it for that because of the bigger tank and the fuel capacity. So that's why I still have the DRZ. And it does not owe me a penny. It has served me very well. It runs perfect. It hit 20,000 miles 2 days ago. Today is Tuesday. It hit 20,000 on Sunday. And we are now the weekend before the Touratech Rally. So this riding that I'm doing right now, I'm just going at a moderate to leisure pace because I'm narrating and rambling a bunch. I can ride this stuff a lot faster, but it's not wise to do that when I'm telling stories. So how did I get into dual sport motorcycling? I've got a video, I'll link in the description below to that, how I got into motorcycle riding in general.